By understanding these forms as moments of an organic unity, we can move beyond the superficial view that sees them as incompatible opposites. Their differences are not barriers to coherence, but are instead the engine of development, the tension that drives the dialectical progression of thought. This progression constitutes the life of the whole, a self-sustaining process in which each form both preserves and transcends its predecessors, building toward an ever-deepening comprehension of truth. Opposition to a philosophical system frequently misunderstands the nature of its own stance, failing to recognize itself as part of the broader dialectical movement it seeks to critique. Such opposition often approaches philosophical systems as if they were isolated doctrines, capable of being dismissed outright based on their perceived inadequacies or contradictions. This approach, however, is fundamentally one-sided, as it neglects the deeper interconnectedness that binds all philosophical forms within the dynamic unfolding of truth. The perceiving consciousness, the mode of awareness that engages with these systems from a vantage point external to their internal logic, typically lacks the capacity to free itself from this one-sidedness. It views opposition as a definitive rejection, rather than as a moment within a larger process of development. Consequently, it fails to preserve what is essential in that opposition, the role it plays in propelling thought forward, in challenging limitations, and in contributing to the eventual synthesis of a higher understanding. What remains obscured to such consciousness is the mutual necessity of the seemingly opposing forms. In viewing contradiction as a mark of failure, rather than as a driver of progression, the perceiving consciousness misses the dialectical nature of truth. Each conflicting form is not merely an obstacle to coherence, but an indispensable moment of the whole. These moments, though they may appear irreconcilable in isolation, are in fact bound together by the necessity of their mutual tension, a tension that drives the evolution of thought and reveals the deeper unity underlying their surface opposition. The failure to recognize this unity often stems from a limited, linear conception of truth, where ideas are judged as correct or incorrect in isolation from one another. Yet truth, as grasped philosophically, is not a fixed endpoint that can be measured against isolated claims. It is the totality of its unfolding, wherein even contradictions are subsumed as moments of development. In this light, opposition does not negate a philosophical system, but instead illuminates the boundaries of its perspective, preparing the way for the integration and transcendence of these boundaries in a more comprehensive system. To free opposition from its one-sidedness, one must adopt a dialectical view that sees contradiction as essential to the movement of reason. The tension between opposing forms is not a sign of failure, but a sign of vitality, the necessary condition for the life of the whole. This recognition requires a shift in perspective, a willingness to see beyond the immediacy of disagreement, and to embrace the broader process through which truth emerges. Only then can the perceiving consciousness rise to the level of speculative thought, wherein oppositions are reconciled and the apparent fragmentation of thought gives way to the unity of reason. What might seem fitting to include in the preface of a philosophical work, a historical overview of philosophy's tendencies and evolution, a broad summary of its content and conclusions, or even assurances about the validity of its claims, ultimately cannot dictate the proper mode of presenting philosophical truth. Philosophy, by its very nature, resists such external framing, because its essence lies not in static declarations or isolated outcomes, but in the dynamic movement through which truth is revealed. The mode of its presentation must, therefore, be determined by the unique demands of speculative thought itself, rather than by conventions borrowed from other domains of inquiry. Philosophy operates within the element of universality, a realm that transcends mere particularities while simultaneously containing them. In this universality, individual elements are not discarded, but integrated, transformed into moments that contribute to the whole. This characteristic distinguishes philosophy from other sciences, which often deal with their subjects in relative isolation, breaking them into discrete, analyzable parts. For philosophy, however, the particular cannot be understood apart from the universal, and the universal cannot exist without the particular. This interpenetration creates a distinct challenge. Philosophy often appears to encapsulate its subject matter entirely in its overarching purposes or conclusions, giving rise to the illusion that its detailed, step-by-step development is secondary or incidental. This illusion stems from the way philosophy seeks to articulate the essence of things in their most general terms. Unlike the natural sciences, which rely on empirical observation to build cumulative knowledge, or the historical sciences, which trace the unfolding of specific events, philosophy aims to comprehend reality as a totality. Its general claims can, at first glance, appear to capture the entire essence of its subject matter, as if the purpose of philosophical inquiry were fully expressed in its ultimate results. This perception can lead to the mistaken belief that the detailed unfolding of philosophical arguments, the careful dialectical movement from one idea to another, is merely ornamental, a laborious path that could be bypassed without loss. Yet this view profoundly misunderstands the nature of philosophical truth. The truth of philosophy is not a static endpoint or a set of abstract principles that can be separated from the method by which they are derived. Instead, philosophical truth resides in the very process of its becoming. The movement from particular to universal, from contradiction to synthesis, is not merely a means to an end, it is the end itself, the living realization of thought as it comes to comprehend itself. To neglect this detailed development is to miss the essence of philosophy, for the universal cannot truly be grasped without the particulars that constitute its content, and the particulars find their meaning only within the context of the universal.